Hello, and welcome back to Harlem Stories. I'm Adam Feinberg, and today I'm with my co-host, Mark.
Hi, this is Mark Becker. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today, Mark. Today, we're going to do something a little different that we haven't done in a while that we probably should mix in a little bit more on. More of a broker assistance kind of type of topic. We deal with these purchase and sales every day, and we see, some of the tough circumstances that our clients are, can wind up being up against. So we want to address that today. And today's topic is 5 ways to compete against all cash offers. So I think, what motivated me to write this episode is that the stats are for quarter 2 for 2023. They're now in, and roughly around 65% of all buyers in Manhattan are all cash buyers. The numbers are even more shocking when reviewing home type, with approximately 75% of all condo purchases as all cash deals. And to be fair, only about 30% of homes for sale are condos in Manhattan. Co-ops, which represent about 70% of homes for sale, had about 58% of sales this quarter as all cash deals. And since co-op boards can formally reject a potential buyer, it's more common to see buyers financing co-ops. And in a co-op, the co-op board can require a bank to pay the monthly maintenance that would share the shareholder default. So in many instances, the board might prefer a buyer that is financing part of the purchase, as it provides sort of a guarantor. And for the buyers that are financing, all hope is not lost. We want to give you points of encouragement and points that might help you. I've got many ways for, buyers that are financing to remain competitive versus an all cash buyer without increasing the bid of the financing buyer. Certainly increasing the bid is one way to do it, but that's not what we're talking about today. A few of the many points to help the buyer finance include, but aren't limited to, these few suggestions. Making sure you have your real estate transactional attorney selected before you submit an offer. And this is actually, I know that in a couple of deals that I've made, the fact that I had my buyer prepared, with having a transactional attorney going into the offer and letting the seller's attorney, the seller's broker know that, we are ready, we are raring to go. And even know that you're going to need it in order the attorney to move forward with any deal, so why not have that attorney selected in advance of an offer? Having an attorney that specializes in real estate transactional work is important versus hiring a general practice attorney that is friends with your Uncle Joe and that's not going to help you. The listing agents want to know that the attorney isn't going to hold up the deal or miss important points because they don't do this type of work every day. So having the right type of transactional attorney, somebody that specializes in New York City real estate, transactional work on a regular and routine basis, that's really important. And, and on the same note, it's supposed to have a completed REBNY as early as possible so that your agent has time to review your finances and consider some of the best ways to position your finances. For buyers that have salary job with minimum bonus, checking and savings account, perhaps a 401k or similar retirement account, but you're too young to access those funds. Perhaps a brokerage account where you might have held the same investments for years. Odds are the REBNY financials will be pretty straightforward. But for buyers that have greater financial complexity, the longer your agent has to review your REBNY, the better off you're going to be. So a lot of this is preparation in advance. Having that REBNY in advance so that we know how to present you. So let's say you're a business owner, and we see this quite a bit. And, what if you're carrying too much cash, in your business account, but not enough in your personal accounts? One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that REBNY and advise you and say, hey, move that cash on over. These are the things that don't actually cost you any additional money in terms of the home purchase, but you're moving things around to make things much more advantageous to you. So
one of the things I tell people in regard to the REBNY is, you don't have to supply supporting documentation with the original REVNY. So make sure your numbers are materially correct.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the precise balance, but it should.
When you go to the board package, you're going to have to do a whole other one with up-to-date numbers. So that, I try to prep people for that.
Right, and in essence, the difference between the REVNY at the offer stage versus the REVNY on the board package stage, at the offer stage, it can be approximate, but a realistic representation of where your balances are. And it's okay to do that quickly, but make sure that we're getting a robust picture. Don't forget items. So for instance, people that that work on in the acting world or the entertainment world, they might get residual checks, and believe it or not, a lot of people forget to put their residual earnings on the REVNY. So that's like certainly one thing that we'll want to discuss, and this is also part of the reasons why we like to have you prepped so well in advance. So having the right pieces in place, having that right transactional attorney, because I'll tell you, the difference in seeing a transactional attorney, one that I recognize on the other side of the equation. I know from a brokerage standpoint, I know that transactional attorney knows what he's doing. I've recognized the name. Have I worked with them before or not? That's less relevant. The fact that this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. They're not working on on ambulance chasing type of things. They're not working on on other projects or M&A and things of that nature. They're not working. They're solely focusing on real estate transactions. They look through hundreds of pages of the offering plans on a routine and regular basis. They're reviewing the building financials on a regular basis. This is what they do. So having these people in place, it tells the other side that you are serious about the process, that you're prepared for the process, and that you're ready to move forward. So, certainly that is, one aspect is preparation. Next, having an agent that specializes in this type of sale. Maybe the specialty is an agent that's done a lot of deals in a particular building. Maybe they specialize in buildings that are like HDFCs or land lease co-ops or condotels. The buyer should have representation that will help them best complete by understanding the specifics of what's needed for each deal. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've specifically won a bidding war for a client where my client was not the best, the highest bid. In one instance, it was because they had a higher credit score, and I included all this information. I included how stellar of an applicant they were included into the offer. But then I had another offer that I got accepted specifically also in a bidding war, where the client was not the highest bidder. But in that instance, it was because the listing agent knew that I worked with HDFCs before, and specifically, he wasn't sure himself on HDFCs. He's the listing agent, but he's like, you know what? I want this deal guided by somebody that knows these types of properties that can help guide it smooth some of the things that I don't even know myself. So, that was one of the reasons why my client wound up getting it, and they got a steal on it. And, even though there was a three-way bidding war and my client was the lowest of the three, they selected it specifically because I had that institutional knowledge.
You gotta have your ducks in a row.
Exactly. So, that organized offer, with robust details, I kind of delved into that a little bit, before. I walk my clients through lots of questions that it can be answered before an offer is submitted, because a detailed offer can make all the difference. What if an all-cash offer is in a co-op where dogs are allowed on a case-by-case basis, and my client doesn't have a dog? It could be something as simple as that. So while the all-cash offer does have a dog, I want my client to have every advantage that we can give them. So I walk them through lots of scenarios, and anything that we can enter, that works to their advantage is certainly something that, we're going to, offer to them and structure into that offer as structured and organized transaction. That's something that just too many agents don't give substantial thought to. And I think that, the agent that does this is the agent that stands apart. They're the ones that are getting the deals done more frequently. And, so you're going to see that in a quality agent. So this is also not just about how to, win against all cash offers, but, how to select the right agent for you as well. So, but this also applies to the clients, their revenue financials, which, for those that are just not very familiar about it, and we just talked about the revenue for a moment, but just for those that are not familiar, the revenue financials is, I think most easily described as part income statement, part balance sheet. And, it's intended, to know whether this particular buyer that's being presented, do they have a reasonable shot at getting past the board?
I always refer to it quite bluntly, maybe too bluntly with my clients, is it's just basically an accounting of your net worth.
It is that. It absolutely is that. I like to break it down a little deeper, but yeah, that's exactly it on a high level. But, as I review the buyer's, detailed financials, we're going to look to find ways to strengthen their application or their offer. Another way to kind of compete against an all-cash offer, have the buyer skip the pre-approval and just go direct for the approval. Now, this is not something that every bank or banker is going to offer, and the buyer might have to pay some fees up front that they would normally pay later in the process. But submitting a buyer with a bank approval, where the bank has approved the buyer, not necessarily the building and the appraisal still needs to be approved, but the buyer's financials have already been fully vetted by the bank, and it makes for a much stronger offer. It's often a quicker deal versus somebody that has only been pre-approved. So we're trying to give our clients the every leg up opportunity that we can find.
Is that a commitment letter that you're talking about?
Well, the commitment letter is ultimately, going to include that appraisal. So no, but it is an approval letter.
So somewhere between a pre-approval and a commitment letter, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the bank has fully vetted your buyer. Mm-hmm. So the parts that haven't been vetted are the building itself. Whether they can lend in the building.
They've seen your tax returns and all that.
They've seen your tax returns. They've seen all of your financials. They have fully approved you. So the only questions that are that they're outstanding over here: can we lend in this building? And and assuming that we can, it's also goes down to is the appraisal going to match up? So those are the only two factors. But the buyer themselves, they're approved for financing. So we know that there's multiple levels of approvals, when we're talking about banks. But as far as the buyer themselves, they're done. They're approved. They've gone through that process. So not every banker will do that. We do have bankers, at Elegant that we work with that do offer that. And it's going to be on a bank by bank basis. So even if you've got a banker that's experienced it, let's say they move to another bank, the other bank might not necessarily allow it. So, it's on an ongoing basis that we always have to check for these types of things. Another alternative, put down a larger down payment, make the offer non-contingent on financing. As agents, we're always concerned that an appraisal comes in lower than the contract price. And if that appraisal comes in below the contract price, it could wind up killing the deal. It could wind up getting renegotiated, or ultimately the buyer can opt out to putting down a higher down payment, in order to minimize the risk to the bank, leading to the bank to approve the loan when they might otherwise decline to move forward. By offering to put a higher down payment up front, it minimizes the risk of a low appraisal killing the deal and allows the buyer to remain competitive. So, the buyer could wind up certainly killing the deal if that appraisal doesn't come in, at a reasonable number. But, a lot of times we find our buyers actually still want to go through with it. And we might be questioning, the appraisal itself. So even in the event that even a banker the bank doesn't want to move forward, the buyer could make the offer wanting to finance as a first choice, but they can also make the offer non-contingent on financing if they're in a position to do so, of course, making the offer a bit more attractive when comparing versus multiple offers. So these are just a few ideas that help pave the way for a buyer that's financing, remain competitive in a mostly cash buyer off market. Conversely, if I'm on the listing side, I'll advise my seller that I might be looking out for these points, and that other than make a strong offer, even though they might prefer an all cash deal. Sellers often prefer all cash deals because they think, this is going to go easier, smoother, quicker, slam dunk. But I can tell you, from doing so many deals, a lot of times the cash buyers are a lot more demanding. So,
one thing I will tell some of my clients who are financing and trying to compete against cash is, every $5,000 that you put down is every $5,000 increase in the sales price. You only have to put $1,000 extra down if you're in a 20% building.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Nut is not crazy.
Right, exactly. So it's an incremental amount that you're putting down. Sure, you're also looking at ratios, especially for looking at co-ops, and we want to make sure that those ratios still wind up making sense in every way. But yeah, I think that's an exceptional point. Is for every $5,000 in a traditional 20% down building, you're only putting down $1,000 extra,
and you got 30 years to pay that other $4,000 back.
Right, exactly. And even at today's high interest rates,
$10 a month, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. So these are some things. Buying and selling in New York City is just a very different process versus the rest of the nation. And clients really want to vet their agent well, because these are the kinds of things that will make a difference in the process.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you'd like to add, Mark? Or
no, I think you covered it, and I just would encourage people, even in this higher interest rate environment, don't be intimidated, because as Adam alluded to, everything gets baked into the cake, and you can always get a deal in any market.
Absolutely. And, the big thing is that we enjoy helping our clients come up with creative solutions to whatever, they're up against. And, we're there to partner with them to help them get the deals done. But as always, it's great to have you on Harlem Stories. Thank you so much for listening to our loyal audience, and have a great day. And we're going to have a lot more great content for you in the future.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.